Kate Milafalcha. Welcome to Irish Granny Tarot. Welcome back. This is video 2 of They Walked with Jesus by Dolores Cannon. And we're just going to continue as we were. If you've missed the first video, we've gotten all the way through chapter 5, so you'll want to go catch up with that. And her other books that we've covered previously should be in my playlist on my channel if you're interested in pursuing them. Very popular writer. So, chapter 6, the departure. So Anna, the subject, again, is in trance with Cannon and says, I am 13 now. She calls herself Naomi. She says, I'm 13 and I know I must be following him even if I have to go in disguise. Life's not worth living if I have to stay here, if I have to live here and get married and have children. Her dad calls it foolishness. Her mother understands her, but is very committed to the gender roles of life of a woman. Her father believes in this man's teachings, and he would be fine with it, with her going if she were a boy. But he says there's only one path for a girl, and there's only one path for her. So a year ago, she was told by Jesus that she was too young, that she would walk with him at another time when she was older. She says, he will accept me because it comes from my heart and from God. So at the moment, he's at his family home visiting his siblings, and he's not married. She says he's married to his God and to his beliefs. This is not about following him because, you know, he's a rock star. This is being committed to his energy and his teachings. She says that his brothers are jealous of him and they're having a big problem because he's just too popular with people. His mother was not able to marry his father. So he was illegitimate. And at the moment she's ill. I guess Joseph, the father of Jesus, was older and had other family, other children. And Mary and Joseph had a relationship. And she says that her father and Jesus don't have the same mother. Her father is one of Joseph's older children, and Jesus is his illegitimate child. And the father is much older. Her father is much older. And this causes pain in the family. There's a lot of angst, social angst around it, but it happened a long time ago. And she said the custom they have is that some children are named in the memory of somebody else. And her father is named Joseph because her grandmother named him after his father. And, okay. Her father married, and I'm so confused. Is Joseph... Her father married the mother of Jesus and had other kids. So he did marry Mary, but he was born... I give up. Just suffice it to say that Joseph the carpenter had another family and other children, so that Jesus had siblings, half-siblings. And it was not, first of all, Immaculate Conception isn't what people think the Immaculate Conception is. Mary is the Immaculate Conception. Mary was conceived without original sin. That makes her the Immaculate Conception. This is the story that grew up around her. She was entirely pure, without the sin of Eve, no original sin from the Garden of Eden, the apple, She had none of that, so that she was pure enough to carry Jesus within her, until he was born. People think he's the Immaculate Conception. No, he wasn't. It doesn't mean that he was conceived immaculately. It doesn't mean that at all. He was the son of Joseph. Mary is reported to be the Immaculate Conception. Think of like a pure vessel. That's the words that they would use. Anyway, that's your religious teaching for the day. So, where am I here? Anyway, the angst in the family, and the kids named after family that's passed, and she wants to help teach and to heal, and She saw him once heal a child of a fever. She says, I know this was a miracle. He healed what she calls a cripple, and he healed blind people. She says, you know he's different when you see and talk and touch him. She says she's heard that she also is supposed to live singly and devote her life like he has. He went away and he learned, he went very far, was gone a long time, and he learned from wise men in far countries. And that is actually a story associated with Jesus, is that when he was a kid, you know, and there's this gap between the age of 12 and then in his 30s. So he goes from being a kid in the temple teaching the priests to suddenly being wandering in the desert for 40 days of like a walkabout or something, some kind of a retreat in the desert. And so in that period of time, in some part of that period of time, it is said that his uncle, Mary's brother, was Joseph of Arimathea, and he was a tin merchant, and he had ships, and he sailed in all kinds of different places in the world. One of the places he went was through the Mediterranean and out the other end, Gibraltar and around, and up into Britain, and went to Wales because Wales had tin mines, and that Jesus went with him, and that he also went to India and Asia, and Jesus went with him there. And I think that they took him away to take the heat off because he was already starting to say things that were getting the priests upset. Not only did they not like what he was saying, they didn't like the fact that a kid was saying it to them like he knew better than they did. So they removed him from the scene for his own good, you know, his own benefit. And he was supposedly in India and China, Asia, some part of Asia, learning, maybe Tibet, learning basically Hinduism and Buddhism, ancient Eastern philosophy. And this is what drove the Catholic Church crazy, because the original teachings of Jesus were very much Eastern philosophy, you know, reincarnation, that kind of thing. And they had the Nicene Council in the 400s and voted it off off the island. So he went away and he learned all kinds of important things from wise men in far countries, and this learning makes him different and has caused problems for his family. His brothers were not interested in any of this. He's just so different. It causes problems in their village. People gossip, people shun them. They don't want anything to do with it. A lot of people think he's faking all this stuff for attention. One night she heard her parents talk about him bringing rain to an area of drought. He just wants to teach about living with love and kindness, and that being the true nature of man. He wants to talk about peace without fear and without jealousy. And he finds the ways of the priests to be cruel and unloving. For example, they don't have any interest in helping the poor. They have no compassion. They pass judgment on people. The rabbis settle disputes. They think that they're God, and they didn't like the fact that Jesus questioned them. He'd solve problems with justice and mercy and equality, and with ways to make amends, to learn from problems. He had more clarity and fairness, and this made the priests mad. And he didn't like hypocrisy. Naomi describes the eastern and western sections of Jerusalem, and Cannon looked it up later and found it very similar to the descriptions in the histories of Josephus. The people keep as much apart from the Romans as possible. The Romans are arbitrary and capricious in how they oppress the people. She says, I'm ready to leave. I'm ready to get out of here. So Cannon moves her in time forward to the time when Jesus has returned, and he has 3 guys with him. She manages to tell him, take him aside and say, okay, I'm going with you. And he knows he can't stop her. He said, okay, so it shall be. And she tells her parents, and her dad gets real quiet. Her mother cries. But Jesus convinces them that this is her path in life and she has to do it. You think about it, she's 14 years old, going with these strange men in that culture? Yeah, not good, huh? So they're headed to a leper colony, so that's even better, right? And she says she's sad to say goodbye, but she's happy to go because this is her work that she wants to do. Counting her, Jesus, and everybody else, there are 12 of them. She's given an amulet by her father that he made when she was a child. It's a 6-pointed star with a letter in the center that says life. They're going southeast to the hills and the sand, and then she sees green in the distance, which is remarkable because they have lived in the desert. Cannon's research shows that Qumran, the community there, the women were equal. Women were better able to grasp the metaphysics of Jesus than the men were, so they were particularly active in the group. According to the Torah, a woman was inferior to a man. Women took no part in public life. It was suitable and expected for women, especially unmarried girls, just to stay indoors. They were not supposed to leave the house without an escort, and when they did, they were expected to remain unobserved in public. Oh, Mike Johnson must have been making the rules. Marketplaces and council halls, law courts, gathering meetings where a large number of people were assembled. Public life was all proper for men, but not for women. During the huge popular feasts, which took place in the court of the women at the temple, the crowds were so large that it became necessary to construct galleries for the women in order to separate them from the men. They could participate in the local synagogue service, but barriers of lattice separated the women's section, and they even had their own special entrance. During the service, women were there simply to listen. A woman had no right to bear witness in legal matters because the law concluded that she would automatically be a liar because of her gender. Some of these rules were difficult to enforce for economic reasons. Many women had to help their husbands in their professions, such as selling wares or working the fields. However, a woman could not be alone in the fields, and it was not customary, even in the country, for a man to converse with a strange woman. This custom was often broken by Jesus to the astonishment of his male disciples. He openly conversed with women wherever he found them. The rules of propriety forbade a man to be alone with a woman, to look at a married woman, or even to give her a greeting. It was disgraceful for a scholar to speak with a woman in the street. Oh, get over yourselves. Women risked condemnation and censure if they broke the laws. Women only learned the domestic arts. Women were 100% under the control of the senior man in the house. They had no rights. They had to exhibit full obedience. The kids were taught to respect the father before the mother. Before they were 12, they could sell a girl. At the age of 12, it would be an arranged marriage, and the husband then owned her. Naomi risked being trapped by the age of 13. So Jesus preached to women and wanted them to be equal. This took a lot of courage for people to say it, for people to listen to it, and for them to do it. Chapter 7, the village of the lepers. Leprosy is contagious. It wasn't understood at the time. It was feared. We now know that it's caused by a microbe. It's called Hansen's disease. It's caused by Mycobacterium leprae. And it's transmitted in airborne droplets. It has a very long incubation period, 2 to 20 years. So you could be exposed to it 20 years ago and take that long for it to manifest itself as a disease. It can be cured with 6 to 12 months of antibiotics and multiple drug therapy. Obviously didn't exist in those days. If left untreated, it destroys the nerve endings and then the skin, eyes, and nose lining. There are 208,000 cases in the world, mostly in Asia and Africa, approximately 100 cases in the United States every year, and this is as of the 90s. Leprosy persists in populations with poverty, malnutrition, and poor sanitation. It's a microbe, and usually would disappear after 2 generations of improved conditions. In Jesus' time, it terrified the people, and they were isolated if they were exposed to it or had it, so others would not have to see it because they were so afraid of it. They called them unclean. They wore bells around their necks so people could get away from them, hear them coming. Their villages, which were called leper colonies, were shunned. And it appears that often other skin lesions were also called leprosy, even though they weren't, and they weren't contagious, and they weren't life-threatening, but to be on the safe side. If you were unfortunate enough to have something like scabies or psoriasis or ringworm, you might be called a leper and sent off to a village of lepers. And once there, you weren't getting out. Also, mold and dry rot in the Bible is called leprosy of the house or raiment, the clothing. So if you had, mold in your house, or your clothes got moldy or rotten, it was considered a form of leprosy, and you were also shunned. Also often misidentified as leprosy. In the Middle Ages, there were entire leper hospitals that were filled and later found to have not one case of leprosy, which they knew by digging up the graveyards attached to the hospitals. In Jesus' time, they took no chances. Anyone with a persistent skin problem was unclean and went to the leper colony. No one could come near, no one would touch a leper. The symptoms begin as a loss of sensitivity in the extremities, your fingers and toes, and then you get blotches on your skin, and then you get, your digits get red, and then they get ulcers, and then they fall off. And your joints can dislocate. It's very disfiguring. Facial bone and cartilage is attacked. It's a slow, massive physical destruction. Causes mutilation and disfigurement. It also involves internal pain, burning, but it is curable with the proper course of medication. In the Bible, Jesus didn't go into leper villages. He encountered them by chance on the road. Excuse me. But he would go into individual homes, just not the colonies, the villages. In this session with Naomi, she says she was taken by Jesus to the leper colony. And she thought maybe, in retrospect, he was hoping to dissuade her from this idea she had that she was going to work with him. But they went into the village, and the group thinks that she's a boy because, everyone thinks she's a boy, even the followers of Jesus. She calls herself Nathan, the son of a friend of Jesus. So this leper site is isolated, and she's not afraid because she knows it's where she should be. The group of 12 does include 2 older women who are healers. She says the lepers know them. They have been here before. Now notice they're not preaching. That's not why they're there. They are only there to give medical care of a sort. So they're going to camp in the village, and they sometimes have doctors that come. This time they don't. They just have assistants. In the first house is a man who's in very bad shape, who she sees Jesus lay his hands on him, and she sees his hands glowing, and the man's pain goes down. Jesus shows her the center of his palms and tells her that hands have another heart chakra. And Jesus is talking chakras here, okay? And there's much healing power and energy there that's strong medicine. Jesus is different because of the understanding he has and because of his lack of fear. He's sure of his duty. He is an ordinary man with an extraordinary spirit, high energy. And he tries to tell people that everybody could be this way, everybody could do this, everybody has the ability. But most of us are distracted from that path. The a human's life makes it really difficult to be pure. No kidding. Okay, here. She said, he tells her, my brother, I am no more than you. I guess somebody is remarking on his abilities. I'm no more than you. I only recognize what I can be and how I can serve. I have true love and faith in my God. He tries to clarify what he thinks his purpose is, which is to be a teacher and a ray of life, to be an example of the gifts humans have and what humans can do for each other. People have fear and they don't know their heart. And one of the things they do is to go to a house of orphans. Most of them don't even look sick, although some do. And there are adults who stay with them and care for them. Sometimes she says she sees even a halo around him. Mostly what he does is ease the pain of people. Sometimes the disease stops progressing. And on rare occasions, they really are healed. He tells her that illness in some people is a part of their progression, part of their learning experience in this lifetime. So we're talking multiple lifetimes, and that the lessons are to be learned, and that they can't be taken away. The disease can't be taken away. They need to learn from it. That they created this situation in a different lifetime. Like they chose it, is what he's saying. People who die soon of an illness, he says, can move on rather quickly because they've completed their lesson. They've had a hard time and they've completed their lesson. Jesus talks about that they've been here before. So like I said, reincarnation. He says we're all on God's mission, and that every time we come, we come to learn and to serve. And he says that he knows far more from his foreign study. She says he knows far more from his foreign study than the rabbis do. He fills the rabbis with fear because of the questions that he asks that threaten their authority, and people don't usually do that. So she's very happy working where she's working. Canon moves her forward a few days, and she sees Jesus give a woman a cup of water. The light of God is in you, he tells her, and he sees this glow from his head, hand, and heart, and the woman feels healed. And she will go on to become a healer. When he touches people, he sees their heart and sees their mind. He has clarity about their path. She saw him bandage a sore on a man's face and put his hands over it, and the next day it was 100% gone. The pain was gone. Everyone he goes to is eased in some way. Maybe not healed, but eased. After 7 days, they go on to the next village, and some of the group helps with repairs on buildings, and some of them are scribes and help write letters. Some of them are teachers. The people that go with him have a lot of different abilities, and they want to be of service. It's kind of like he's got his little Red Cross Habitat for Humanity group that's traveling around. John the Baptist would go ahead of them, and he was like the PR guy, the front guy. And the reason he went ahead was to organize places to stay and food, because this is a fairly large group that puts stress on small communities. And so this session now is over, and Canon is having a conversation with Anna, and she's retained some memory of the session, which doesn't often happen. And she said the uncured people aren't mad or resentful of the cured ones. He's able to give them the understanding. The feeling of ease that he gives everyone makes them happy just for everybody else. She remembers the love that he showed everyone, and this is the same effect that he had on Miss Mary, the other person. She says it's important that he didn't heal everyone because it depends on karma and destiny. Chapter 8, the village on the Sea of Galilee. So Anna, in session, once again is speaking as Naomi, and is in the second village that they've traveled to. And the job here is to spread the word of love by service, and to reinforce the numbers of people who want to come and help them do this really hard work. And they're on the Sea of Galilee, which later on Canon finds out that Anna had never heard of. But in session, she talks about it. And this reassures Canon that Anna's not making things up. I suppose she could deny that she'd ever heard of it, but it was pretty genuine. In this village, it's very small, and it's supportive of Jesus, and so they feel safe about their teachings. John the Baptist, he got that name because there's a bit of a ritual to cleanse people in the lake, and it's literally about cleansing. And you get the feeling from the story that it's more about hygiene than anything else, and it's done as a ritual to get the followers ready to be able to follow. So I suppose if you've been working with lepers, that would make sense. There's a bluff over a lake, and in the bluff there are caves, and they have secret meeting rooms inside of these with false fronts. So if they're discovered, all they find is a cave, but there's meeting behind the illusion of an end of a cave. Not well known. And Canon says this is true. Around the lake there's a place called Magdala, and there are natural caves in the bluffs. And during this time, it was heavily forested with fruit trees, and the Jordan Valley was a good place to travel. Because of the trees, it was a good place to travel to avoid the government, and the Romans wouldn't notice you. So the news of Jesus' teachings and healing spreads a lot, and those in power are keeping tabs on him because they like the fact that he's staying away. Because the farther away he is from the bigger cities, the less likely he's going to foment rebellion. That's what they really fear. Meanwhile, the priests are glad he's gone because he's not challenging their authority. Naomi's description of the area and the attitudes agree with the historical record. John arranged to meet in the bluff in secret, these meeting rooms for the crowd, for the group, because of the safety. There's so many in the group now. In this session, they're planning on relaxing in that night and then going to the meeting at dawn. She says, we are able to be self-reliant here, and we can also accept help from the people. They meet in this recessed area in the bluff with a hidden entry. Stones and trees and natural things block the sight of them. There are wooden benches and tables in these cave-like places that hold about 40 people, men and women. They know that the government is uneasy about them. They don't want people, the government doesn't want people to think for themselves. So Jesus tells them not to be afraid. He says they're walking the path of God. The eternal light in your heart never dies. So stop worrying about what the government's going to do to you, because that's an unimportant issue compared to the larger metaphysical issues. The priests are going to go along with the Romans, because they're like, they're kind of like the Republican House, the Congress. The rabbis go along to survive. And this larger group is able to blend in with the Romans and spread the word. Jesus reassured the group not to fear whatever happens, because anything that happens to you is a lesson. Now, this is really interesting. You don't hear this in Christian churches or necessarily in Jewish temples, although you might, because I don't actually go to Jewish temples. Been in plenty of Christian churches. And, you're not told your difficulties in life, look at them as a lesson and see what you can get from them and learn from them. You're told you're being punished because you're bad. So Jesus told them, look into your heart and be of service to your fellow man. The larger group tells Jesus about the work that they've done, and in their smaller groups. So when they get together, they share. And they lead by example. That's their teaching. They don't go in and say, now we're going to read letters to St. Paul. They didn't exist then, but you know what I'm saying. They're not preaching texts and doctrine and dogma. They're saying, let's help these people that need help. Watch me help them, and then you'll do the same thing. Jesus doesn't want the fellowship to be dependent on him. He wants them to break up into groups and to go out and do their own thing. So they're going to a new village, which is a larger community with a well in the center of a large square. And this is more like a small town, and they go there to get the water from the well. She says she's going to stay there with some older followers to help, and he's going to move on and will return for her later. Jesus confers with the men who help him arrange the next movement forward. She'll be working with a guy called Abram, helping sick and orphans and the elderly, or teaching. Abram knows that she's a woman, the girl, but she's still passing as Nathan. But she sees more and more women becoming involved, and she may not need to disguise herself much longer. There are more women, and she's getting older. Now she's between the age of 13, 14, and this whole thing is taking longer than was expected, and she's looking like an adult. Jesus teaches it's not important what body you're in, male or female. It's what's in your heart. And they're trying to teach people that God is in all of us, and we are all connected from our hearts outward. He says that what he does is a possibility for all of us, that he is like any other person, just more mature. He believes that God's laws make everybody one, and the only important thing is to live through the heart, be of service, care for one another, and it's wrong to keep this message a secret. The priests fear losing power if people think for themselves, and they think that regular people are not worthy of any of this. And this is as opposed to Jesus, who tells them we're all worthy, we're all one, we're all connected, we're all equal. Our way of living will help the teachers, will help teach, he says, by example, nonverbal communication. I emphasize nonverbal as in not sermons, not lectures. Your past is less important than the moment that you come to the realizations of what he's just said. It's a slow process. It may take many lives, and you need to heal yourself first and get into this information slowly. Not to have expectations. This is another fact. So next week when we read our next book, we want to make a correlation between these teachings in this book about Jesus. One of them being that one person doing good can create great change. And now the other thing that he said that corresponds with the book I'm going to get to next week is not to have expectations. You do it because it's the right thing to do. And not everything can be put into words. You must come to know that you are the perfect essence of God and not fear. Doors to your healing others will open once you embrace this knowledge of self-healing. He speaks in parables to large groups of people that he doesn't know. It's a more direct. He is more direct with smaller groups of people he trusts, but parables are a good vehicle for teaching large groups of people and letting them, if they're hearing this for the first time, letting them figure it out for themselves. Once again, he emphasizes you're not to preach and shove it at people. You're to help people. And using parables helps to make this easy to get across, and his followers go where the help is needed. They don't go to recruit. They go to help and lead by example. And I wrote in parentheses, this sounds more like social work. And the only message that they really ever had, the only rule, is to love and to care for one another. Like I said, the Red Cross and Habitat for Humanity. So he told her he'd be back to get her. And he teaches about focused, silent prayer, which sounds mysteriously like meditation, which would be an Eastern thing that he brought forward, which is rejected, if you look at it in that way, rejected by the Christian churches. I had a friend, this is a great story. I had a friend who freaked out when her child was at the local grade school, and they took a little time, like, how little kids had nap time. 3rd and 4th and 5th graders, they had a 15-minute period of time where they had them sit quietly and meditate and do a little yoga. And oh my God, she and her ultra-Christian friends were up in arms that they were teaching the children yoga, a tool of the devil. I don't believe that. That's what she said. Okay. Another thing that he said in his meetings is no one is higher than anybody else. Chapter 9, a vision of Jesus' death. In the next session, Anna, once again as Naomi, it's been about 3 months have passed. Jesus is returning to the village, and she's glad. She had stayed at the house of Ben David, that's the last name of the family, and has helped people, has learned healing, and unexpectedly has fallen in love. She says it's painful to look at Jesus because when she does, she is telepathic, and she knows what's going to happen to him from the light energy around him, because he knows what's going to happen to him, so they're communicating telepathically. And she herself, while he was gone, has learned much philosophy. And the village is a group of people who agree with him anyway, so there's a lot of teaching that's going on. And he left her there to test her commitment, see if she'd get freaked out by working with the lepers and the sick people and the old people and the orphans. But he admired her commitment to helping others through love and brotherhood. She feels a great fulfillment from her work. The women were accepting, and women were given a role in the group because they were willing to care for the sick and the elderly. So of course they were willing to babysit. So she fell in love with the son of the house of Ben David, Abram. So that's the guy she was working with. So he reciprocates, but he's unusual. He says he's going to let her decide what she wants to do. He wants to marry her, but she can't see how she can do that and continue her work. She feels that her next job is to go from place to place doing the itinerant healthcare, that Jesus has been doing, but she'll have to wait to talk to him when he gets back. So moving forward in session, she's able to speak to Jesus, and she's alone and telling him about her vision of what she needs to do. And she feels that the love of the Spirit will eclipse her ability to have a marriage. And she's had this vision that she's come to serve, and that he's also come to serve, and that he's hurt because so many people can't hear what he's trying to say. And they're so full of fear that they are going to kill him. And this is, it's a little disturbing for his followers. He tried to teach that we're all family, and he's done what he can do. And it's a minority who will continue his work, and it's time for him to ascend. And this is the third thing to remember for next week. One person can make a big change. You can't have a predetermined goal. You have to go with it. And this work can spread with a very small number of people. So she was upset to have these visions, and she needed to tell him about it. And he told her to respect her visions. They were God's words that were coming through her eyes, and that his service was done, and the next step was his ascension. But if she felt a calling to go out and heal people and take care of people, then that's what she had to do. So there's so much darkness around that he was needed elsewhere on other levels, is what he told her. He told her, which is Hermetic philosophy. He told her that her walk with love was to follow the path of light and to struggle against fear. And the only truth was light and love. He told her it was okay to change paths as long as it was done with truth and love. He told her to stay with the village and work, and her path will become clear to her. For now, her purpose is to help the lepers and the orphans and see what happens in the future. So these are his words, not mine. I'm not espousing any kind of medical advice. I'm simply telling you what the book says he said. He told her that fear can cause disease, which we actually know that's true. High blood pressure, stress, heart disease can all be caused by fear and stress. And living with fear can... living without fear can protect you from disease and can create healing paths in your mind and heart. I'm not giving medical advice. I'm repeating what's said in the book. I'm not espousing anything. So there are those who have tested him, but he saw and knew what they were doing, and he's oblivious to him. For example, a soldier paid a beggar to lie about the fact that Jesus tried to heal him and it didn't work. He's trying to turn the crowd against him because the Romans feel he's threatening. And Jesus told the crowd, oh, this is a trick. He explained to him what this was all about. And so they turn around and start throwing stones at the soldier, and he made them stop. So he couldn't heal one blind guy because his blindness served an important spiritual lesson, and they discussed this, and the blind man became a follower of Jesus. And when he can't heal someone, he always explains what's going on. He tries to stay out of Jerusalem because the resistance to the Romans and the Jews there, it's a hindrance to his message, and he has more acceptance in the villages, and he can do more good. She knew that he was confined and tortured by the Romans several different times in his life, which is an interesting part of the story we don't usually hear, and that he survived unsurvivable treatment. He was kidnapped and held in a maze of cells underground and tortured. And they also pay people to ruin his reputation. The Romans are freaked because his followers are growing, and they fear this because they're equating this with revolt. They want to turn the masses against him to solve this problem, and it's why he avoids Jerusalem, but he's going to go back because it's part of his destiny. She knows that he doesn't want her to go with him in this group to Jerusalem because they all know what's going to happen, and it's really not necessary for her to experience that. So he returned, as we know, on Palm Sunday, and the disciples feared for his safety. And this is why they feared for his safety, because of the upheaval. He had been safe in Nazareth beyond the power of the Jerusalem authorities. So one of John's jobs is to find out safe areas where they can hole up and do their work without spies and informants. In Jerusalem, there are many religions and strong religious nationalism, God and government, and they reject his message with a lot of anger and resentment. This is not just, oh, this guy has some crazy ideas. They really don't like him. Against this background, he was perceived as not national enough for the nationalists, too old-fashioned for the Sadducees, too modern and liberal for the Pharisees, and too strict for the ordinary people of the street. He had a difficult time trying to be all things to all people. People's only education and entire life was the law of Moses. They're not taught critical thinking, not taught to think for themselves, not taught to be independent, not taught to question the rabbis or the priests. And they regard Jesus with suspicion because he's the opposite. His ideas are really radical by comparison, very opposite to traditional teachings. He's called radical, he's called a madman. And the Sermon on the Mount is extremely against tradition and the status quo. And in my opinion, this is not in the book, this is just my opinion. This is the single most significant, important thing in the Bible. If you had to pick one thing in the Bible that was the most meaningful and brought it all down to the core kernel of truth, it's the Sermon on the Mount. So he was really against rites and rituals, the laws of the temple. He felt they didn't have any concern for the needs of the people. And the peoples of the area were terrified by the oppression that was going on politically. Like I said, there was a lot of arbitrary terror going on, the oppression of the Romans. And they were trying to put down anybody they felt might be rebelling or revolting. And they actually killed over 2,000 of the people involved in some sort of riot or rebel behavior. They crucified 2,000 of them and planted them along the sides of the road. Just left them there. It's kind of a thing the Romans did. So the people were desperate. They were really looking for somebody to save them from this kind of oppression and to overthrow the Romans. It's like they were really looking for a political leader. And the Zealots were at the heart of this movement. They were called Zealots not because of their beliefs, their ideological beliefs, but because of their political point of view. And they were really good at keeping emotions in aflame, because that's what motivated people. And they thought literally that he would be a new political leader like a king and replace Herod. And the real connection between this zealot movement and him was Judas, poor old Judas. Anyway, when he came to Jerusalem, he got a big welcome, and the Romans knew, okay, they were going to have to put a stop to this because it was getting out of control. His popularity was becoming a political threat. It was creating chaos in the ordinary people. Like I said, there was rioting in the streets and people died. And they were fearing that the rebellious behavior was going to get completely out of hand. And he had, gotten out of their clutches a couple of times. So if he wanted to, very simply, could have done it again. But this was destiny, and he was ready to bail out. And he had huge control, apparently, over this, which seems to be true of a lot of ascended masters. They have more control over their coming and their going both, interestingly enough. So he could determine the circumstances, time, and place of what happened to him. Chapter 10, Naomi's story of the crucifixion. And I felt like there was way too much sort of prurient interest about this, and I glossed over a lot of it. Canon, in her notes, says that there was a lot of time between these sessions with Anna, who was busy and was not obsessed with all of this. It was not a compulsion. And she was always able to reconnect immediately with the life of Naomi. So this next session is that she's told that her purpose is to go around to these villages and to continue the work that they had been doing, that her vision about this is true, and that actually he's no longer in the physical all that much. And he confirmed this to her. It's like one of those stories from the other books that you can be in two places at once, that you it's hard to put into words our brains can comprehend, but there's sort of an extension of the spirit. It's not a splitting, but it can be over here and it can be in here and it can be elsewhere in other dimensions. So the more ascended a person is, then the more likely that that is possible. And so he's kind of preparing himself for things to come. And she's not planning to go with him. He tells her that they'll still be in contact no matter what happens, because they've been communicating telepathically the whole entire time. And he leaves because his purpose is served, and now he's got nothing further that he needs to do. And for his own personal growth, it's time to move on because he's needed elsewhere. So Anna is the next session. So that's the end of that session. The next session, and they get her into trance, and then Anna starts out with crying and says, well, he's dead. And she's walking to a village, and lo and behold, sees him on the road. And you hear these stories, and it looks like a three-dimensional solid person, but they don't they don't speak in words. They communicate telepathically. And he tells her that she has love and should go on. He's proud of her service to others, and that they'll always be able to communicate. It's not a big deal. And help those who can't help themselves. He's fine. They'll continue communicating. And Anna then tells the story of what happened. So he was arrested by the Romans, and his followers rioted in the streets, and there were people killed in these riots. The temple leaders felt that he had been blasphemous, or at least they could accuse him of that all this stuff about miracles and healing and love and stuff was just hooey. And they said, okay, prove that you can do these things that you say you can do. And it's not like that. And in order for it to work, it has to be a relationship. The healer and the healed have to work in concert. You don't just do it on demand as a party trick. Anyway, they made an example of him, but a lot of the stories around it are fundamentally true. There's a kernel of truth. There was a death, and he was seen after that. His body did disappear. And I wrote down here that Canon is just a little bit too obsessed for my taste on the details of all of this. I don't think it's necessary, but the Romans guarded where his body was put because they were really afraid that he would, you see this sometimes in a Middle Eastern culture. Some political figure will die and their body is held aloft, laid out and covered and carried aloft by people through the streets, and the crowds are packed, and they're making kind of a martyr, an example. And the Romans knew this, they'd been there a long time, and they feared the reaction of people. So they didn't want his body to become a fixation and something for people to rally around. And they guarded. They put sentries. But the next morning he was gone. So the implication is that these guards were actually drugged to fall asleep, and then his followers, his family, came and took the body. He appeared multiple times to a large number of people. Sometimes he talked with them, sometimes he didn't. There's the whole story of the Pentecostal, the Pentecost, the Holy Ghost coming down over their heads. Sounds very much to me like the crown chakra, but what do I know? He did tell a group of followers who were all upset because of the circumstances of his death, and they felt guilty. He said, "You're forgiven. You had nothing to, don't worry about it." He had been betrayed by several fake followers, and his followers were doing his work in the villages, and they saw him a number of times after that. The government didn't really care about these villages out in the boonies, and they left them be. They didn't let them go ahead and do whatever they were doing. If they wanted to change the bandages of lepers, they didn't really care. The government didn't really care. So Cannon moves her forward to visit when she is visiting her family, and she notices very much that they're aging and that they have kind of an innate sadness. They were torn between the traditions of their religion, the temple teachings, and these new ideas that he had brought. And after his death, they lost heart. Now remember, her father was like the half brother, and he had a vision after he died, after Jesus died. He had a vision of him, and he was all well and healed and good, and this was the same vision she had of him on the road to the village. So it was a kind of a reassurance thing. He was one of the people that went to the sepulcher to get his body. There were about a dozen people who did it, and it would have required that because it was a big stone to be moved. The soldiers, when they discovered, were really mad because they were going to get blamed. And she says, yeah, they were drugged. There had to be a plan of a large number of followers to do this. So Cannon moves her forward in time, and now she's very old. She's helped form a very successful community, and her time is done to ascend, and she's just happy that there are people left to continue the work. And she starts to name some stuff, some places, which is great because then Cannon has something substantial that she can research later. So the name of this particular community is Beth Sharon. Beth means house. Bethlehem means the house of bread. Beth Sharon means the house of roses. So Rose of Sharon is redundant, the Rose of Roses. She's not married. She never has. He has appeared to her quite often while she's been alone, and kept her hope alive because she's so frustrated with people in general. And he keeps reassuring her that people can live without the barriers of government and religion, these artificial structures that we put around ourselves, these patriarchal, theocratic structures. He had no interest in starting a new religion. That was absolutely not what that was about. It was about the truth of caring for each other. And this is significant that Cannon talks about this at length because, as I said, her context, her origin is very conservative, fundamental Arkansas Christian, and it's very significant that she's moved forward from that. So some of his disciples, the ones that were closest to him, they hoped to gain power through his teachings, and that was not what the whole idea was. And that's why he died fairly young. Well, he wasn't really young for that time, but he was relatively young. He saw that people were just simply not ready. They just weren't ready to hear it and do it right. Okay. Chapter 11, Death is But Another Pilgrimage. This is the last session that she had with Anna as Naomi. Near the end of Naomi's life, she was 68. She had worked all these years with the lepers, and she remained healthy, and she claims this is because she had no fear. She was blessed by a life of service. So early on, she had visited her parents every year, but it got harder and harder to do that, and then impossible to leave the village because there was no one to really help with the work that she had to do while she was gone. It's kind of an arduous trip. Cannon names places, and she conferred with Jewish scholars after these sessions, and they confirmed that these words were genuine. but the places were so unimportant, they were not on a map. For example, she has a description of Nazareth, which was a smaller version of Jerusalem. And Anna was able to recall the Jordan River when she was young. She recalled her parents and Jesus talking of Qumran, which was where the Essene community was, and that he and his cousin John had spent time there. And that is what other books have verified. He told her that he learned about the ancient tree of life there, that there were different levels of education there, depending on how ready you were for it. He learned how to be of service. He learned philosophy. He learned healing. He had access to information that even most of the students there didn't get, because he was actually remarkable in his abilities. He was taught esoteric information more than just about anybody there. They just didn't get it. He did. And we live in conjunction with the universe was the thing, and the connectedness of all things was another important lesson. Connectedness of everyone to everything and the source of everything. And we have this. Canon says, why would they consider the tree of life to be something that people shouldn't know about? This is this occulted information that's kept away from the average person, but taught by the Essenes. And she says, Anna says, it's because it's the truth. It's the various paths of a person's being and body and soul, and its connectedness to the sun and the moon and the tides. It explains why things are and what they are. And Canon says, I think these would be wonderful things to know. And Anna says, well, this is what's called the Kabbalah, also known as plasma physics. So he simplified it because it's just complicated and people just don't get it. Our brains are not wired the right way for it. Canon asked how she had asked her if she had been to the Dead Sea. She said that she didn't know the name of that was the name. It was called Elot's Sea, or the Asphalt Lake. And actually, this is the area where Sodom and Gomorrah were. So what happened there? Many of his followers scattered for fear of their lives, and they went underground, literally and figuratively. She was sad because people didn't understand his teaching. She was sad because people didn't understand how they were being manipulated by both the government and the temple, still going on today. People are afraid of change. They comply without question. His teaching was the simplest path of service. The Romans turned everyone against all of his followers, so they had to lie low. She remembered Simeon Ephraim, that was Peter, still trying to carry on his teachings. Jesus knew that Judas was going to betray him, and because he was a zealot, he was trying to gin up this rebellion. And there were others involved. It was a plot. And he told Anna that he knew his life plan before he ever came. And he says, if you have fear, you can't discern the truth of your life plan. And this is part of the individual's life plan, is to not let fear derail you. Judas was persuaded by the Romans to instigate unrest and riots, and in return he got money and land. There were rumors he was murdered. There were rumors of suicide. Nobody knows. You know, it's all just a story. But he allowed the plan of his life's purpose to play out, and Canon asks her, well, how about, what do you know about his birth? And Naomi says, well, his mother had a lot of children, and there's much talk of his conception being a miracle, but she said that's just talk. It happened in the usual way. It was the person who was exceptional, not the birth itself. So she was told that we are all God's children, that we have been other exceptional children, and to many, there are too many man-made ideas associated with this story that are just phony baloney. Her father was his half-brother. He was older and had older children, and they had a different mother, not Mary. Naomi met Mary when she was a child, when Naomi was a child. She said she was just a regular woman, nothing unusual about her. They were a simple family. They were just ordinary villagers, poor, happy, average, you know. The stories of raising the dead, she said that's really just healing someone who appears to be dead or near death, but not really dead. And that there needed to be a desire on the part, we talked about this, a desire on the part of the victim to continue the purpose in life in order to get better. So Canon moves her to the day of her death. She's old, she's lived a long life, she's ready to go. She is met by him and taken to the next level. She says, I can see my body peacefully leaning against a tree. I went on a walk. I sat under a tree. I was tired. I closed my eyes and now I'm looking down on my body. It was fast, strange, and wonderful. I'm welcomed. I'm happy to be home. I'll be learning to take the path and walk with him towards another sort of pilgrimage. She said, I tried my best. I ache for people who are slow to learn the truth, that a life of learning and love and knowing is what we're supposed to be doing. And I feel like I'm going home. In the following months, Anna told Canon that she was curious about the details of these sessions finally, but she couldn't make herself listen to the tapes. It was just too much. It lit up too many deep-seated emotions that she just couldn't handle. Too personal to talk about with other people, not even extremely close friends. So Canon gave her the transcript, and she was able to read that with a little more comfort, a little less anxiety. And she drew this that she remembered from the session. So Canon ends this by saying that the memories seem to help both of the women in this present lifetime. That Mary improved her picker, got a lot better because her expectations improved. And Anna began volunteering with hospice and specifically working with the families of the dying. And she didn't find that working with them was depressing. She preferred to work with the terminally ill. Canon says she was struck by the depth of emotion of the women towards this man, and that it's difficult to convey on paper what she saw coming from them. She said that the depth of their emotion revealed his true nature and purpose. The end. And I wonder how many times before Saturday, before the actual Saturday, I'm going to have to redo this. So thank you for watching. I'll be doing a card reading and raffling off the book. And nobody has collected the other two books, so I'm too lazy to get up and go look at the name of the people who won them, but I will, when we do this raffling off, I'll remind people to get their books. And in the meantime, thanks for watching Slongafoil. Slancha.